All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone. I'm Mark Davidson. I serve as the executive director of Voices for Justice in Palestine, and you've joined the webinar with the title "Living Under Oppression: Stories from the West Bank and South Sudan." We've all been focused on the Gaza genocide, which is still ongoing. And then we became much more aware that it was spreading to the West Bank. We've also focused on the genocide in Sudan and then ethnic violence and displacement in South Sudan. And on our own streets, we've seen the struggle of brave and vulnerable people against powerful authoritarian forces here at home. So living under oppression is the rule of the day. When Mary and Beth and I met, we focused on this notion of living under oppression and telling stories from their experiences about that. And we are so thankful to both of you that you chose to go with the Catholic Worker and Sabeel delegation to the West Bank and offered yourself as witnesses. We're so glad that you're here and that you can share those stories with us. Before we get started, let me just give a technical word about participation. You'll remain muted until we come to the question and answer, which will be at about 3 o'clock, and we'll leave a full half hour for Q&A interaction. When we get to that point, I'll introduce it, and then you can raise your hand or use the hand symbol on Zoom, and then I'll recognize you, and you can unmute yourself and interact directly with our speakers. Just a word about who we are. Voices for Justice in Palestine is a social justice nonprofit working in the Palestine justice and solidarity space. Our mission is to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for dignity, justice, and equal rights. And we're involved in community education, webinars like these, legislative advocacy, and media presence. Uh, it's a wonderful thing to welcome you and to be here today, and also to call on Burhan Ganayam, who is the president of our board, Burhan, to bring us a word of welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I am Burhan Ganaim. I'm the chairman of the board. I wanted to welcome all of you. Uh, Webinar. Thanks for this and with us. I'll tell you this month, know most of you may be focusing on the ethnic cleansing and what is happening in Palestine and the West Bank now. But Israel this month instituted new rules in the West Bank that for the first time since 1967, and that is it's enabled citizens and government to steal Palestinian land. I wanted to give you an example. My wife was born in Palestine in 1967. She and her family were living outside of Palestine. Israel now gonna declare all of their properties as absentees properties, which allow Israel to take it over and pass it to whoever they want. If you went to Jerusalem and certain areas of Palestine, there is Palestinian homes that are now inhabited by Israelis. And that is really this month started. And it's terrifying. My family are in tears. Even I have property that I inherited from my family in the West Bank, and that property could be classified as absentee, despite the fact that I have American citizenship and a Palestinian ID card. So they are in a rampage, and this is happening at this time because of one thing. The US is enabling Israel as never before. I mean, Israel is controlling Trump with his Kushner and Witkoff team, and they figured out this is the time to go for a choke, an end to all of this. Uh, it is all is done in my name and your name. It is our tax dollars that's enabling all of this. I'm going to stop here and let us hear from the speakers. But it is extremely serious. Thank you, guys. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Burhan. Let me introduce Beth Brockman and Mary Grace. First, Beth. Beth will be presenting first. Beth Brockman is a peacemaker and social activist living on land formerly stewarded by the Okanichi Band of the Saponi Nation, also known as Durham. Beth has visited the West Bank with delegations in 2009 and 2024.
It's
Excuse me? Oh, sorry. All right. Most recently, she joined the Catholic Worker and Sabeel delegation to the West Bank in 2025. And I'll introduce Mary Grace as well at this point. Mary Grace is co-founder of Upper Nile Orphan Care Organization. Her work is focused on trauma, resilience, and belonging. She is engaged with ministries of hope with children, neighbors, immigrants, and people with disabilities. Mary Grace also was part of the delegation of the Catholic Worker and Sabeel to the West Bank this past year. So, Beth, we'll look forward to hearing from you now. Welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. It's so good to see some familiar faces here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen here. So a caveat just to start off. One of the delegates on this last delegation that we were on said that really it's best to get our news from Palestinians and and news sources rather than from me or from other US or other biased media sources. So I'll start off by saying that. I'll also say that I'm not a historian or a geographer or a political analyst. So my part in this webinar really is going to be to share some stories with you, with some facts that were shared with me. And I'll leave it up to the political analysts and historians to do that sort of work. So I'm just starting off this webinar with a short story, and then turn it over to Mary Grace, and then come back again and share some more stories with you. So the Catholic Worker delegation that I was on this past December was with Sabeel, as Mark said. And for those of you that don't know Sabeel, it means the way in Arabic. And Sabeel is a Palestinian Christian liberation organization located in East Jerusalem, whose vision is to stand with the oppressed, to work for justice, and to engage in peacemaking. So I want to share a story that actually happened on both delegations that illustrates that when coming and seeing a people living under oppression and making an attempt to some semblance of solidarity and presence, language matters in the going and the telling. So after arriving in Jerusalem, the director of Sabeel, Omar Harami, on both delegations that I was part of, took us to the village of Lifta, just on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Upon arriving at the site on my first delegation in 2024 and seeing the empty buildings, I asked Omar how long the village had been unoccupied. He looked me square in the eye and he said, "We don't use the word unoccupied. We say depopulated." Omar continued, "This village and more than 500 other Palestinian villages were depopulated in 1948 during the Nakba, or catastrophe, what Palestinians commonly refer to as the beginning of Israel as an independent Jewish state. 700,000 Palestinians, or 85% of the population, were displaced and became refugees. Omar told us that prior to 1948, Lifta, with a population of 3,000 people, was one of the largest Palestinian villages in the Jerusalem area. Omar also told us about the nearby village of Deir Yassin, a thriving community of 600 that suffered a terrible massacre in 1948, in which 220 men, women, and children were murdered at the hands of Zionist terrorists. Zionist forces committed more than 70 massacres during the Nakba, killing around 15,000 Palestinians. Unlike Deir Yassin, which is now occupied by the Jewish neighborhood of Givat Shalbet, Lifta is unusual in the Palestinian landscape, as it wasn't destroyed by Zionist forces or planted over with vegetation to hide its remains. I found it not only poignant, but extremely telling that this is what Omar and Sabeel first introduced us to upon arrival. It begs so many questions. What happened to the people? Where are the ones who survived? Where are they living now? What are their lives like? What has become of the depopulated villages? What or who occupies them now? Those questions would be answered on the delegation in the days that followed. Because I've been to Palestine before, prior to 2025 in this last trip, and experienced the radical hospitality and presence of Palestinians looking out over the remains of Lifta, I could easily imagine what that village was like before it was depopulated by military forces. Neighbors serving strong, bitter coffee in small cups, women cooking makhluba, a delicious chicken and rice specialty dish, children laughing and playing outside, villagers caring for their farm animals, and farmers carefully tending to and harvesting from their vegetable plots, fruit orchards, and olive trees. This is also resistance and what it means to live under oppression. I'll turn it over to Mary Grace now.
Thank you. Let me try this. Yes. Oh. Okay. Thank you. Does the screen look appropriate? So, wow, yes. What is the sound of one small child starving to death? Me sipping my tea. That's from one of the other delegates, Victoria. Why does God allow evil may be the wrong question. Why do we allow evil? So thank you, Mark and Beth. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share, although I find it difficult to create a coherent narrative out of this morass. Historically, I live along the Okanichi trading path on land stolen by the US among people of amazing, disparate backgrounds and cultures who offer joy, challenge, and insight and hope in my daily life. This land was violently occupied by white Europeans who believed that they had the right to colonize, to rape, and to steal. Tragically, what's happening in Gaza and Palestine is not new. What's happening in South Sudan and so many other lands is not new. It's just caught on video now so that we can see and almost smell and taste the blood. My goal in sharing today is to reflect on the systems that white supremacy perpetuates throughout the history, from colonization of the US to the African struggles and the establishment of the State of Israel. This systemic approach recognizes that people who claim privilege over others arrive in a land and declare themselves the saviors and the conflict resolvers, but are oblivious, uncaring, or hateful toward the pre-existing culture and population, and therefore they perpetuate oppressive behavior. This pretty much always involves the theft of land and resources. The same is true for Israel. By presenting the establishment of the State of Israel as a solution for Jewish people who have been historically persecuted by the white supremacy itself, white supremacy solved the Jewish problem that could no longer be postponed after the open-mouthed horrors of the Holocaust. To do this, Britain forced the occupation of the already inhabited territory of Palestine, which is a repeat of what Britain did to the people of Sudan in 1882. That was yet another abysmal white supremacy failure with its colonial path dependency. In Palestine, by mandating a state of Israel and spreading Zionist ideals, white supremacy itself exploits the historical trauma of Jewish people, convincing Zionists that there is no alternative but violent occupation and supremacist colonization. Trying to understand this widespread historical cycle of fear, domination, and trauma is my focus. The moral depravities of racism and anti-Semitism was the rationale for the creation of the State of Israel in the first place, because many whites around the world clearly, vocally, and violently did not want Jewish people living among them. How does hatred sit in one's heart? To be unwanted in the world. As a result of generational trauma, many Palestinians and Jews are constantly on edge, like Black people and immigrants in the United States now. They just never know. They live in this precarious space of being unwanted. How does it feel and impact our identity, our lives, actions, and even our spirit when the larger body politic objects to our very presence? As W.E.B. Du Bois asked, how does it feel to be a problem? Zionism is a direct result of the horrific legacies of colonial systems of dominance. Christians and Zionists have used fear and warped scripture to rile up support for the State of Israel, leading to this brutal destruction of the Palestinian people and their homeland. Mark Twain lamented empire. He wrote that we follow our leaders, quote, through blood and dirt and a mush of mutilated morals. Our main guide in Palestine, Beth has mentioned Omar, he's a Palestinian Christian. He said, to destroy empire, build community. As I connect our experiences in Palestine with historic generational racism, anti-Semitism, and vast systems of violent oppression in South Sudan and elsewhere, I ponder what leads the oppressed to then become an oppressor. The Nazi and Klansmen I met in Charlottesville in 2017 seemed like broken, angry little boys desperate for a place to belong. I see a parallel then to the tragic generational and internalized trauma of some Jewish people, leading a minority of Jews to embrace Zionism. But within these systems of violence rooted in fear, white supremacy and Zionism, the oppressed have become, indeed, the oppressors. I wish I had the time and the skill to explore systems and had the ability to really do deep analyses of the horrors of racism and the power dynamics that impact Palestine. These tie snugly to other more forgotten places in conflict, like South Sudan. Although I may know more than some about the history of South Sudan and what's happening there now, it is horrific. Like Gaza and the West Bank, massacres in South Sudan are increasing. Bodies are thrown down wells to pollute the water. Good women are learning de-escalation skills to try to prevent gang rapes. They struggle against the corruption that is generationally entrenched by centuries of colonial oppression, manipulation, and extraction of resources, primarily the extraction of Black bodies. Being in Iraq, Egypt, and South Sudan, I somewhat began to see these systems interconnected. I see it in our country as well. But it was in Palestine that I clearly saw how these systems themselves are so corrupt, so deeply entrenched with lies and evil into occupied land with psychological terror, physical constraints, pain, and policies, so that the veil Du Bois talks about seems to be pulled back just a smidgen. I urge each of us to challenge all these genocides and the manufacture of superficial differences so that more attention might be focused on what unites us across the world, so that we can create the beloved community that pushes back on empire. To talk about systemic racism, Zionism, and anti-Semitism, we should start with a couple definitions. So racism is not just one person being mean or discounting another because of superficial manifestations of pigment levels, although that behavior is certainly racist. Racism is a system of domination, exploitation, and dismissal rooted in an artificial hierarchical value assigned to pigmentation in order to exploit and oppress others for both personal and systemic gain, and to use those unjust powers to maintain social and economic control. Anti-Semitism is similar to this and must not be dismissed simply because most Jews seem to look white. Jews are an ethno-religious people who tend to build community within a Jewish structure of shared culture and usually religion. About half of the world's Jews live in Israel right now because they were afraid, because of the very real anti-Jewish persecution around the world. The other half of the Jewish population live in the diaspora all around the world, where some continue to be persecuted and harmed. I want to make a distinction between Jewish and Zionist. I no longer use the word Jew for Zionists who support Israel, although some do use that term for themselves, and I admit that. I only use the term Zionist now. I was married to a Jew. I love the Jewish people and culture, and I don't want to be a contributor to anti-Zionism. Words have power, and our opposition to Zionism is not anti-Semitism. This struggle for freedom in Palestine is a profoundly faithful response instead to the breaking of God's holy commandments by a rogue, faithless state intent on coveting their neighbors' goods through horrific oppression and murder. Many of you in this moment may also be thinking of the realities of ISIS attacks and the erasure of Black and Native histories here in the United States. Those are crucial connections. Our Holy Land delegation focused on the horrors endured by the Palestinian people, as well as learning of the good, amazing good being done by amazing activists in Palestine, Muslim, Jews, and Christians. Being a widow of a kind Jewish man, I simply don't see a way to build peace with justice in Palestine unless we address the historic generational persecution and trauma of Jewish people too. How do we stop these cycles of violence? Now in Palestine, Zionists who are generally perceived as white and whose people have been targeted and oppressed since long before Christ are doing the oppressing. Systemic oppression, like systemic racism, needs the power of the state or social structures as well as the support or apathy of the people. This willingness by Zionists to oppress others is rooted in a fatalistic but realistic fear of enduring persecution. Realistic because they know the stories of their families about the Shoah, the Holocaust. They were told about the piles of children's shoes in the camps, the piles of hair, the piles of glasses. Hence, in this situation, the terribly oppressed have now become the terrible oppressor, inflicting daily indignities, troubles, violence, and hateful policies and death. I see a clear connection here with the scramble for Africa. Around 1900, for about 40 years before and after, Europeans whose populace was sick of the war in their own land decided that they would assume control and power by acquiring African lands. This was pure power grabbing, rooted in greed for white men who justified their horrors against Black and brown people with a warped Christianity. That legacy of corruption in southern Sudan, their history of civil wars, is a direct result of the oppression and underdevelopment inflicted by Britain's colonial administration. Colonial powers, through wealth extraction rooted in racism, has led to horrors unimaginable. Throughout history, we have been manipulated into believing in this myth of scarcity. We are told that there is not enough for everyone, and that, therefore, justifies the targeting of other through any means necessary. Dr. Ann Evans, who granted funds to build our little Hand of Hope War Orphanage residential school in South Sudan and has worked in several countries on education and eye health, told me, it all comes down to greed, doesn't it? Greed and the perception of other as not worthy of dignity or notice. I figured to be really obvious, I will read Rita Corbin's The Biblical Works of Mercy. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the sick, shelter the homeless, visit the prisoners, bury the dead, pray for the living and the dead. And the works of war, destroy crops and land, seize food and supplies, destroy home and villages, scatter families, contaminate the water, imprison dissenters, inflict wounds and burns, kill the living. So I was supposed to be playing with orphans in South Sudan's war zone now, but the war there is too volatile, and the Spirit instead led me to the West Bank with Beth and others. What is happening in Palestine is a profoundly racist oppression for a land grab. It is an ethnic cleansing parallel to the horrific legacy of corruption through colonialism around the world. For instance, in Sudan, according to a 2025 Harvard Gazette article, over 150,000 people have died, with 10 million people displaced and 10 million people starving. The world is not attending to this genocide, which the UN has declared as the most dire humanitarian crisis on the planet. Compounding the violence, just like in Palestine, various countries are spreading webs of lies and arming disparate factions. Yet the Palestinian horrors include a tragic flip, where a minority of Jewish people, victims of both individual and historically systemic terrors of anti-Semitism, have been manipulated and drawn into Zionism by the false promise of security in a nation state. They are told they can have safety and security by believing in a state of Israel, by living there and purging the Palestinian people from their own land. Yet 2025 is the first year since its founding that Israel has more Jews leaving Israel than migrating. We must keep a steady mantra that the only real security comes with justice. So Dr. King said, we must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together, and you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. In the 4 war-ravaged lands I have visited, I noted oppressive power grabs over land and other resources. This is always rooted in some form of fabricated prejudice. Prejudice at its root is fear, and Dr. King tells us that only love can cast out fear. Yet in virtually every act of systemic violence, religion is touted as a justification for breaking multiple of God's commandments. In the land that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all call holy, there are decidedly unholy things happening. Worldwide, there is a rising anger at the state of Israel and at Zionists that is now spilling over onto other Jews, again, in yet another rise of anti-Semitism. Yet it is dominating powers that manipulate us into accepting the lies of racism. To transform this anger over what's happening in Palestine, South Sudan, and in other lands, and turn us instead toward perhaps a sad curiosity and an understanding to help us, I study these historical traumas of Jews and other oppressed peoples, and that softens my heart. It allows me to look at it and try to act without anger. As I study and understand the manifestations of present-day racism and anti-Semitism, I can better see the systems of dominance and power plays that lead to crises around the world. Sometimes these are mirrored in our personal lives as well. The historical trauma, which are rooted in a deep body fear, find a superficial outlet and misplaced sense of security by leading us to turn to violence, to a militarism that is almost always rooted in systemic racism and is pushed forward by rampant, unregulated capitalism. Dr. King makes a prescient connection between capitalism, racism, and militarism, and that they combine as the basis for history's and today's wars, conflicts, strife, and oppressions. Everything is connected. Dear Leo Tolstoy wrote in 1904, again, right around that scramble for Africa, again war, again sufferings, necessary to nobody, utterly uncalled for, again fraud, again the universal stupefaction and brutalization. I'm hoping I can play this and then get back to this. Let me give it a try. Nope. I apologize. In this clip, Alice, whom we met in Palestine, she took us to her land. She mentions that the state of Israel is paying traumatized, mentally ill youth, Israeli youth, to attack Palestinians. Hurt people, hurt people. Just an hour after we left her land, it was again attacked. Oh, there it is. I apologize. So we must have talked with met officially with 2 to 4 organizations and individuals each day, all struggling for nonviolent transformation. Among those working nonviolently for change was Badour Hassan. She's a Palestinian writer and legal genocide researcher based in Jerusalem for Amnesty International. She's brilliant. She's also blind. She's documenting Gaza genocide and explains that the Palestinian people are a traumatized society. This links again to the cycles of violence that continue to create newly traumatized people. And that cycle continues, going into their very bones. Badour's connection, she made connections to the Irish famine, to genocide in Bosnia and Rwanda and Congo, Holocausts of Jews in Germany and their persecution throughout and in Darfur. She makes those connections and helps us understand more. So I would love to do a whole presentation on the Banksy Museum in Bethlehem, which has the largest collection of Banksy art in the world. And there's Banksy art all over the walls, these separation walls between Palestine and Israeli settlements. And it's fascinating, beautiful stuff. It's our duty to hope, to insist on finding goodness amidst the pain. If we can only live in peace if we can imagine peace. There's clearly a goodness and a beauty, even fun and humor in Palestine, just as there's remarkably gracious generosity and tenderness in South Sudan. I keep imagining how the world will be different if how would it look if we just loved each other, if we obeyed the commands. In Palestine, it could be free, Jews, Muslims, and Christians all living together, maybe not always easily, but not with genocide, not with massacres and this oppressive hatred. This is Anton Goodman with Rabbis for Human Rights. More Israelis are joining us, not just for human rights work, but for the spiritual refuge, for what it means to be Jewish. We need your pure nonviolent action, not just in theory, but in speech and action. We do not hate settlers or soldiers. We hate what they are doing. I don't know how many times we heard this. We don't want them to leave. We just want Zionists to stop hurting us and stealing our land. And to read this poem by Marwan Manhour. In order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I must listen to the birds. And in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent. Here on the left is another image from Palestine's separation wall, George Floyd. I was kind of surprised to see it there, and yet it makes perfect sense. I hope my attempt to share a systemic historical approach helps us understand the brokenness of the oppressors and the way we're all manipulated to manufacture consent. With compassion and understanding, we may better reach across the terrible divisions of hate and fear to continue the good nonviolent work that is already being done. That's where the healing is. Cesar Chavez said that nonviolence is hard work, so let's just keep building the community Omar talks about. That gives us the resilience to even love our enemies. Mark, I'll toss it back to you now. Thank you.
Beth, are you going to screen share? Yeah,
I will, and I'll share a couple more stories. Thank you so much,
please,
Mary, for
That's
all
great.
of that. It's so good to see those photos and hear some more stories from our trip together. And I'll just continue with some more stories. And I'm going to move on actually from these lovely photos to Hebron. I was able to visit Hebron actually twice, first in 2009, not in 2024. We weren't able to get into Hebron at that time, but again returned in 2024. And big changes, obviously, between the span of 16 years. And the stories that I'm going to tell will kind of combine both of my times in Hebron. And I actually want to focus on the governorate of Hebron, which includes the whole kind of area of the city of Hebron, as well as the surrounding areas. And just share again some more examples of what it's like to live under oppression. So for those of you who don't know, Hebron is the largest city in the West Bank. It's home to 250,000 Palestinians. Unlike other settlements in the West Bank that are on the outskirts of villages and towns and cities, the four settlements in Hebron, home to 800 settlers, are actually along one single road in the old city. All the settlers who live here receive a stipend, so they don't pay any rent or utilities. They're guarded by the constant presence of up to 1,000 soldiers. In this area known as H2, it's under Israeli control, and there are 40,000 Palestinians. So 40,000 Palestinians, 800 settlers, guarded by up to 1,000 Israeli soldiers. So in order to minimize the contact between the settlers and their Palestinian neighbors, and allegedly to ensure security, there are over 100 physical obstacles, including a network of 22 checkpoints operated by Israeli forces in H2, which reduces the, it enforces severe restrictions on Palestinian movement. So when a checkpoint is closed, that means there's no movement. A Palestinian can't go to work, can't go to school for any reason at all. In this particular slide, all of these are taken from Hebron. On the top, there close to the title of Hebron, you'll see an example of a checkpoint. This one, however, happens to be operated by AI. Keep in mind that all checkpoints are heavily armed, including this one that relies on facial recognition. So on our visit this past December, Omar took us down Shahada Street. You can see it pictured there. It was once a booming market, but now all the shops are closed. We were on our way to visit Isa Amro, founder of Youth Against Settlements and fondly referred to as the Gandhi of Palestine. Before embarking on our walk, we were welcomed into a Palestinian home just right at the entrance of Shahada Street and served a delicious lunch in very, very close quarters. But the hospitality was radical and generous. And it was juxtaposed by the rough and jarring treatment we and Omar experienced as we entered the checkpoint leading onto Shahada Street. Omar was able to get permission to enter as our guide. Otherwise, Palestinians are not allowed on the street at all. We walked slowly down the street, a good nonviolent tactic on behalf of our Omar. And we noticed the doors of all the Palestinian shops, as you can see here, they've been welded permanently shut. There's no pedestrian traffic except for a handful of settlers and some settler children. Omar spoke about the history of Christianity, the history of Hebron, how over 300 Palestinian shops on Shahada Street were closed. In total, 1,800 shops around Hebron were first forced close. Earlier in the old city, another Sabeel staff pointed out the screens above us in the narrow alleys, and you can see in that middle picture down at below, the metal screens that are above. This is to protect the shopkeepers, the Palestinian shopkeepers, and the shoppers and Palestinians that are walking down from getting hit by debris that is thrown from above as the settlers live above. And just as if to prove that point, while we were walking down Shahada Street, we were shocked when a carton of milk, a carton of yogurt, potted plant, something with some unknown substance came flying at us from above, barely missing some of the fellow delegates below. I quickly looked up and caught a glimpse of two settler boys that we had seen walking down the street earlier. Couldn't have been more than 10 or 12 years old. Later that week, I did hear about a group of Palestinian Americans who were on a delegation who were harassed by young settler men and boys on donkeys here on Shahada Street. After passing through Shahada Street, we began to wind our way uphill along a crooked stone stairway. The ground leveled out a bit, and we made our way along the path in this very, very peaceful landscape where there were low stone walls and trees, mostly olive trees, scattered throughout. This is called Al Ramada Hill. It's one of the oldest inhabited areas in Palestine, and it's actually considered the origin of historical Hebron. We stopped more than we should have to look out over the city of Hebron with its beautiful stone buildings, the rooftops dotted with the water tanks that are on every Palestinian home, as their access to water is limited by Israel. We continued upwards and eventually made our way to Isa's house. At the time of our arrival, he was being interviewed by an Australian news outlet based in Jerusalem. Two German activists who've been with Isa for the last 2 months offered us coffee and helped us to arrange plastic chairs in a circle as we waited for Isa to finish his interview. When Isa finished and joined us, Omar poked fun at the red pants he was wearing, and the two of them joked around for a bit, happy to see each other, happy to be in the company of each other. Isa thanked us again and again for coming and spoke about his life under occupation and oppression quite candidly. As a child growing up in Hebron, he told us that he had a dream of becoming an engineering professor. He was a senior in engineering at the Palestinian Polytechnic University when the Second Intifada happened, and Israeli forces sealed the doors and closed the university. Isa organized the students and led them in nonviolent resistant actions, including protests, demonstrations, sit-ins, and teach-ins in front of Israeli soldiers for half a year to reopen the school. In the end, he told us their campaign was a success. The university reopened, and he graduated an electrical engineer and an activist. He's been arrested and imprisoned many times since then. On October 7th, 2023, he was detained by Israeli soldiers in a retaliatory raid and beaten and tortured for hours before being released. He told us that he feels like he's chained in his own house with all the curfews, raids by soldiers and settlers, and the unreliability of checkpoints being open. Yet in spite of the harassment, oppression, and intimidation, he remains in Hebron, knowing that he's on the right side of history. Omar told us that because of the two German activists and their presence there, Israeli soldiers have not raided Isa's house nor arrested him. Also in that time, Isa and Youth Against Settlements opened Hebron's first community theater, Hamed Film House, named in honor of Isa's brother, Hamed Amro, who died of complications from diabetes. Isa intends for this theater, located in the same building as his residence and Youth Against Settlements headquarters, to be a platform for introducing the international community to apartheid, violence, and fascism, as well as a haven for people to gather and watch meaningful documentaries. Isa is quoted as saying, "Occupation is about land and narrative. Under occupation, Israel steals the land and twists the narrative. The Palestinians are resisting and remaining on the land, doing what they can to protect us. Isa says that it's up to us to share the true narrative, the one of genocide, occupation, and apartheid." So before going to Hebron, we spent almost a full day in Al-Khair. Mary showed a picture earlier of Budur, who we met there in Al-Khair. But we also heard the story of this Bedouin village of 200 people located in the Hebron Hills. They've been facing Israeli land theft and intimidation since 1980. I have visited al-Khair actually on all 3 of the times that I've been to Palestine. So I've gotten to know a few of the villagers there. June 2024 marked the beginning of violent escalation, including shooting and destruction of the infrastructure, when Israeli forces demolished 11 homes, displacing many families. Despite the severe hardship, when I visited the village in 2024, the villagers shared their commitment to nonviolent resistant efforts and the defense of their homes and way of life. When we arrived this last December and gathered in front of their small, modest community center, I could feel a palpable heaviness and sorrow, along with the joy in hearing the children's laughter and being reunited with some of the villagers that I recognized. I also noticed that the nearby Jewish settlement of Carmel, which has been built on stolen land from the village in 1980, had expanded to include what is called an outpost. 3 trailers not even 10 feet behind the community center. A road cuts through the village to the settlement to Carmel. In the slide down below, you can see some electric lines. These electric lines connect the chicken houses to the settlement, and the villagers have no access to it. They must rely on solar power. Khair is a very conservative community, and so we only met with the men and children. When Khalil al-Hathaleen stood up to speak to us, I remembered that the previous year, it was his brother, Auda, who had spoken. Khalil told us that in July 2025, kind-hearted Auda, a beloved father of 3 children and an English teacher, was fatally shot at point-blank range by the Israeli settler, Yinon Levy. Auda was a key figure in the nonviolent resistance against settler violence in this entire region of Masafrayata. My memory of him was of a gentle, kind affection, particularly for children. And now he's gone, leaving a gaping hole in the hearts of his family and community. Yet Auda's gentle affection lives on in the men who remain. Everywhere I looked, men were holding and caring for the many children running around and playing on the playground equipment and the soccer field under construction. The men lovingly served us generous portions of food for lunch, which had been carefully prepared by the women and carried over in bowls by myself and some other volunteers in the community. Shortly after we had lunch, we had a tour of the small village, the farming, gardening plots that they have, vineyards, fruit and olive trees, and a visit to the goats, including a little very sweet baby goat. Overhead, we could hear fighter planes. We looked up and Omar pointed out the F-16 fighter jets made by Lockheed Martin, an American company, on their way to Gaza, 40 miles away. Last fall, October 2025, the Israeli authorities came and handed the residents of Khair 13 final demolition orders, targeting structures that make up a third of the village. They were given 2 weeks appeal, and then a lawyer got some additional 2, but once those 28 days expired, the demolitions could begin at any moment. The orders target 11 homes, the community center, and their greenhouse. Israel deems them illegal because they were built without permits, even though every permit request they submitted was systemically rejected. Meanwhile, the outpost, erected illegally near the center of the village by Israeli settler Yinon Levy, remains intact. No demolition orders for that. And Yinon Levy remains free. If the demolitions are carried out, it will level the entire southern part of Khair, leaving more than 70 people, including 50 children, without shelter. And just this week, I found out that Israeli forces have delivered a demolition order for the soccer field, which had been finally completed shortly after we left Palestine. But beyond the physical destruction, Israel aims to make life untenable and break the spirit of a community that has become a vital hub of Samud and violent nonviolent resistance to ethnic cleansing in Masa Yatar. This is what it is to live under occupation. Thank you.
Thank you both for profound sharing. Let's take just a minute to let some of these images and reflections settle in our hearts, and then we'll begin a conversation. I was struck from listening to both of you, and this echoes our earlier conversations as well. How you were able to get close to suffering, get close to the brokenness of the people, and at the same time, you come back with powerful um, summons to us to fight empire, build community, build beloved community. I heard enormous um, support for Isa Amro. I remember talking to an activist friend who was recently there after one of his many incarcerations where he had been brutally beaten and tortured and sexually assaulted and left in solitary confinement and denied food and medical treatment, all with an attempt to break his spirit, to break him. And Issa is unbroken. Issa remains a powerful witness for the power of nonviolence, for um, Palestinian resistance, and even those who are less famous are doing these amazing things just to stay on the land and to support themselves and love their families and their neighbors. So I guess I wanted to ask you both if you have, as you've reflected from this life-changing trip, you have a message for the rest of us from your time in Palestine. If you could um, give us marching orders based on what you saw and the hopes and fears of the people, what what would you lay at our feet,
Beth, do you want to start?
please?
Go ahead, Mary.
I think a lot of it just is don't give up. Keep on doing what you're doing and do more. Every day, do something for peace. There is so much going on. There's so much good you can do. I think a lot of it also for me has to do with maintaining my own peace, my own core sense of who I am and my own limitations and boundaries, along with a recognition that people in war zones around the world, their boundaries are being violated absolutely constantly, and yet they still seem to find this way to step forward and step out and risk more and be more in their communities. So, and like write to your elected representatives, call them, send them postcards. Don't give up on the electoral process. Keep voting, even though it sucks. Push for ranked choice voting. I mean, there's just, it all is connected. That old feminist adage that everything is connected. Just stay alive. Stay alive. Stay engaged. Keep loving. And don't give up.
You. Beth, how about you? Anything that's settled for you?
Yeah, I won't, I love what Mary said. I won't repeat those. I am thinking about our visit with Anton from Rabbis for Human Rights. And at one point, one of the delegates asked him during the Q&A time, what do we do when we're accused of being anti-Semitic when we're doing pro-Palestinian actions? And I loved his answer. He looked at this person and said, I think you need to ask yourself, are you being anti-Semitic? And I really felt like it was an invitation to go deeper. And I think a challenge for me as I go forward is to continue to go deeper and um, really challenge myself in the ways that I perpetuate, you know, Jewish Jewish hatred or anti-Semitism, racism, patriarchy. So I've got some personal work to do. And then as far as, you know, what is on what I do afterwards or outside of that, it's a discernment process. I'm a spiritual director, and discernment is such a big part of our actions. And realize there's more than two choices. Do your discernment well, and really trust, you know, in yourself, and trust in your community, and realize that really all that we do has to happen in community with one another.
Yes. Something you said, Beth, makes me also consider resisting taxes. Subtract $10, anything, resist something from your taxes and send in a note as to why. Say why you're resisting a certain amount of your taxes. Just Alexander Haig said, let them demonstrate all they want as long as they pay their taxes. We are funding this. They don't care whether we support them or not, as long as we give them the money with which they can do what they're doing all around the world.
Yes, I would just add to everything that's been said, the statement that Father Richard Rohr has made, that trauma that is not transformed is transmitted. And so much of the brokenness that we see does seem to stem from unhealed trauma. And so I think we can do our own work in confronting our own trauma, our own fears, our own wounds, and finding community and healing in community. And then we have less. It's less likely that we'll transmit it and create new cycles of oppression and new cycles of fear. Um, so there's spiritual work there as well as political advocacy and community work. We've touched some powerful themes here. Let's open it up for any questions from
Mark, if I could, Elena
Please.
in the chat said, I would strongly suggest that anti-Semitism is not anti-Zionism, and we must never conflate the two. I can't reiterate that enough. I actually had it in my presentation, but I was running over in time. And yes, like my husband used to say, my late husband would say that Zionists don't realize that Israel is a people, not a place, and that Zionism is anti-Semitism is exactly, it's not equated, it's not the same. We are anti-Zionist because of this horrific oppression that the Zionist state is doing. Eretz Israel is a place, and it's a dominant nation state that is oppressing people in its midst. It is an occupying force oppressing people in its midst, and that is not what we are doing. Is not anti-Zionist. It is anti-colonialist. It is anti-Zionist. It is a recognition that that dominant nation state is committing horrific horrors and violating all of the commandments. So, thank you, Elena. Sorry.
All right, let's see what's moving among the rest of you. Just raise your hand so I can call on you, and then you can unmute and ask any questions you have of Mary Grace and Beth Brockman. or if a question is not forming, but there's something you'd like to communicate to each of them or both of them, that's also fine. I see a hand up, John Birch. Unmute yourself. There we go. All right.
My hand. Now it's John Birch going to talk. That's Merry Crisis.
John, can you hear us? This is my brother.
Oh, John, we can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted, so just speak up as you can.
Oh, just giving a thumbs up. Thanks, buddy. I love you.
Okay. All right.
We can't find a hand raise on our
Okay, Patrick and
computer.
Mary.
Yes, sorry.
Well, yeah, I want
Sure.
to say, thank you from the bottom of my heart that your observations are, they're just powerful, but your ability to communicate the emotions with that is just stunning, absolutely stunning. I'm very moved by it. I wonder, I don't, and I might be expecting too much from you, but I wonder if there's any hope that you have for the future of Gaza. I hear so much crazy stuff being said by Trump's family, for example, but by other people who, basically, don't even want to revive Gaza. That I just wonder if there's some vision you have that can give us hope amidst something so tragic.
Well, it is dire. One of our delegates, Marcus, is an attorney up in New York, wonderful guy who has a really good level head and is not real hopeful, but also talks about the need to just believe that the Palestinian people will be free, that Palestine itself will be free from the river to the sea, meaning that everyone can live there in peace. We really did hear often that Palestinians didn't feel like they needed to kick the Jews all out. They just needed them not to steal their land and not to kill them and not to shoot their water catchment systems and not to be so horribly oppressed. It was fascinating how often I heard this, and the graciousness with which the Palestinian people welcomed us, and walking down Jerusalem streets, I didn't see any Jewish people smiling. They don't feel safe or secure or welcomed. It's the same. It's this internalized trauma. And I know the addressing of that is difficult. It's uncomfortable, and I think the only way to do it is through like listening projects and compassionate understanding and setting clear boundaries and refusing to arm Israel and doing all of the political things that need to happen to permit the people of Palestine, with a lot of support from a lot of others around the world, to really rebuild their own land and communities. But it's dire, it's horrible and terribly hard. Sudan and South Sudan, Congo, all over the world it's happening, and more proxy wars, like countries are just delving in, dumping weapons, a lot of them American made weapons, which is again a good reason to resist our taxes, all over the world. And it's just these proxy wars are pushing people and compressing the evil and hatred into these explosive, I don't know, too much. It's too much, but love is the only solution. Love is the only solution.
Anything you'd like to say to Patrick about your sense for the future? Any hope for Gaza? All of that?
I don't think we can afford to give up hope.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think we can afford to, even though it's not an easy thing. And maybe hope is one of those, active practices, like prayer or meditation. I got the sense there that it just seems relentless, the violence and the destruction and the hell bent on leaving, rubble and bone and building on top of it. That was my sense that I got being there, and at the same time experiencing this generous, radical hospitality, and people continuing on with hope that it just seems hopeless, maintaining a sense of humor and a faith. And I just think about, the first time I went to Palestine, I saw all these buildings with rebar, at the top, and I'm like, wow, it's so ugly, it looks so unfinished. And someone pointed out that you can't, if your family gets bigger, you can't build this way. You can't build horizontally. You have to build vertically. And so the rebar was actually a sign of hope that they could add another floor to that building. And I've hung on to that, or, to see an olive tree growing out of the crack of the pavement, and all these rocks. Everywhere there seems to be signs of hope. And I keep thinking, well, if Issa Amro and Omar Harami and Naeem Atik and all these amazing Palestinians who I've met, they can hang on to hope, then I can hang on with them. Yeah, and so I'll continue to do that. And yeah, it might be contrary to all the horrible news that we hear, but I don't know any other way to do it.
I think it was Mitri Raheb who said, "I'm a prisoner of hope." It's not an option to give up hope. That despair is a form of betrayal. I would also say, Patrick, and to others, I'm moved by Palestinian historians and theologians and activists who point out that one of the things that has come from the genocide in Gaza is that the mask which was covering the face of Zionism has been ripped completely off. That there's no more illusion that Zionism is anything but a toxic and dangerous force. And the evidence for that is Gaza, and the suffering of the Palestinian people has not been without some hidden power to unmask the evil that they deal with all the time. And I take some hope in that the suffering is not in vain, but feeds um, the continuing movement for justice. Lenore, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mary and Beth, both of you so much for going and for this conversation. I was wondering if you, in your travels, had gotten any chance to talk to any Israelis who might be supportive of the Palestinian cause, and if there is any sense among Palestinians that they have some support from outside the West Bank, but still in Israel and outside of Gaza.
I can say that on this last delegation, the focus, because we're Catholic workers, the focus really was on Catholics, and we only met officially with one Jewish person, and that was Anton with Rabbis for Human Rights. But when I've been previously in 2024, it was an interfaith delegation, and there were Jews on that delegation with us. And so we actually had a service with them, a Shabbat service, with an anti-Zionist, egalitarian group in Jerusalem. And so it's my understanding that it's less than 1% of the Israeli population that is in support of pro-Palestinian. And certainly the solidarity or protective presence that's happening now in the West Bank, they're really relying on Israelis to do that. Internationals, the presence doesn't mean as much as it has in the past. And people are getting deported pretty quickly, internationals are. So having Israelis there doing solidarity presence is really quite key. And there, of course, there are different projects like Breaking the Silence. And we did read about some of those efforts in the Waldorf Museum, the Banksy Museum in Bethlehem. But unfortunately, on this last delegation, we only got to speak to one Israeli. Oh, but I take that back. Actually, Alice and Amira, you saw a picture of Alice with the land with Al Nahor. She actually also has Israeli citizenship, is interestingly enough. She's Palestinian, but her and her sister-in-law have Israeli as well as French citizenship. And certainly they're helping that effort in trying to protect the villages and the towns, particularly from settler violence.
I see a hand up, Kathy Z.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for this, as well as the one a week or two ago. It was so enlightening and heartening. I want to ask this question. In the small town where I live, I've heard a number of times about fundamentalist Christians who are also call themselves Zionists, and who want and support as biblically based the return of the Jews to the land God gave them. And I've also heard this in wider forum, and I don't want to mischaracterize him, but my understanding is that our U.S. ambassador to Israel might be termed in that frame of mind. So I don't fully understand all of that, and I wonder if any of you have more to say about that and how powerful it is in determining our country's stance toward Israel. Thank you.
I could speak to that if Beth, Mary, if you all let me say
Please.
something about it, and
Yeah,
then you can
please.
add to it. I Christian Zionism began in the mid 1800s, and it was a group of people who were obsessed with the end times. They twisted certain aspects of the Bible to try to bring on the apocalypse. And one of the things that they said was that the Jews of the world must return to the Holy Land if there will be a second coming of Christ. So really, the first Zionists were not Jews but Christians, and they set all of that in motion. Then Theodor Herzl and the early founders of Jewish Zionism in the late 1800s picked up on this and began focusing on the need for a state to a place, as Mary was saying earlier, to win the security of the Jewish people, and hence was the movement toward a kind of an ethno-nationalism that was Jewish in character. But many people would say really not Jewish, that the deepest and most powerful critique of Zionism is embedded in the Jewish tradition itself. For 1800 years, Jews were totally opposed to being a state and forming a Zionist entity and all of that. Anyway, Christian Zionism is a very powerful political force in our country. Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador, is a straight up Christian Zionist. He doesn't believe Palestinians even exist, and he's all in favor of illegal land grabs and Miriam Adelson, the largest donor for Trump and frequent in the White House, is feeding the Zionist entity and also pals up with a lot of the Christian Zionists. I would say that fighting Christian Zionism is one of the most important things we can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are great points, Mark. I agree. Zionism really started with white Christians who are racist and anti-Semitic. They want all the Jews to go to Israel, partly because they don't like Jews, but partly also because of this warped sense that they must go back to Israel, that go to Israel so that Jesus can come again. And then if all the Jews in Israel don't convert, then they'll be killed because they're not doing God's will or whatever. But my comeback on that is there is no place that we, and like in this morning, the the reading that we had this morning in the Old Testament in the Catholic Church was saying
Nehemiah?
that Nehemiah.
Nehemiah?
It wasn't. No. It wasn't Nehemiah. It's also in Deuteronomy, but I forget. Anyway, it says no one has permission to violate the commands. No one. That there is nothing that allows you to disobey the commands. And for me, that's the bottom line, is that Jews have no, whether or not they want to be in that place or not, they have no right to kill others. They have no right to covet their neighbor's goods. They have no right to kill. They have no right to do all these things that they're doing in violation of God's commands. If God's going to bring it about, we, all of us, Jews, Christians, Muslims, we all need to be obedient to the scriptures and let God's will unfold in obedience to the commands. So yeah, and I would encourage people to watch a documentary called The Bad Faith documentary, Bad Faith. It's really interesting in helping people understand how Christian nationalism became Christian Zionism. It's all this push really for power rather than for true faith. It's a capitalist push for dominance and power, white dominance and power. So that's a helpful tool to look at it as well. Oh, but yes, it's terribly embarrassing to me. I am a Christian. I love Jesus. He's so wonderful. And I find it really frustrating that I have to say things like, but I'm not one of those. I don't like having to say that. I want it not to be such a strange disconnect. So Kathy, the question about Christian Zionism is that people have been manipulated, and Bad Faith talks a lot about how people were manipulated. And it's not just about Zionism, but just about life in general. So that's a really important thing, is to look at narratives and question the narratives that we're being put that are being put forth for all of the issues, and to pay attention, find our own truth.
I see a hand up, John Bach.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes.
Mary Grace, my old friend. It's good to see you and happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
The last time our orbits collided was at Dan Berrigan's memorial in New York City. And I would like to invite him into our circle right now, because he has been such a mentor for so many of us. At one time, he took it upon himself to reread the Psalms and to enflesh them with a modern context. He called it the Book of Uncommon Prayer. Psalm 126, both the original and Dan's version, has to do with liberation in captivity, which is utterly appropriate for what is going on in the heroic struggles of the Palestinian people. Dan looked at the psalm this way: when the Spirit struck us free, we could scarce believe it for very joy. Were we free? Were we wrapped in a dream of freedom, our mouths filled with laughter, our tongues with pure joy? The oppressors were all struck. What marvels the Spirit works for them. Like a torrent in flood, our people streamed out, locks, bars, cages, gulags, ghettos, a nightmare scattered. We trod the long furrow, sowing in tears, slaves. Then a lightning bolt loosed us, and now we tread those same furrows, half drunk with joy, the golden sheaves in our arms. So for you, Mary Grace and Beth and Mark, thank you for putting those golden sheaves in our arms.
Thank you, John. Beautifully
Thank you,
stated.
John. Thank you so much. So sweet to see you.
And Dan Berrigan in our midst. Presente. Yes.
Yes, and Dan also, didn't he write 10 Commandments for the long haul?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it true that sometimes even the name, the title of a book can kind of transform life? 10 Commandments for the long haul. There it is.
So we've got time for one or two more questions. I, the floor is open. Elena?
Thank you so much for this presentation. It brings back a lot of beautiful memories for me. Who in 2024, I was blessed to be able to go. Can you speak a little bit to the plight of the Christian Palestinian who is now 1%? They are only 1% of the population, and the impacts on the Christian Palestinians. Please, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you, Mark.
I could start. I guess I'm sure Beth will have more to add. We did spend most of our visits were with Christian Palestinians because we went as a Catholic worker delegation, and we went to Bethlehem, and now is fully surrounded by settlements, and they're starting to build walls and the infrastructure, which prevents Palestinians who live there, Palestinian Christians who live there, from getting to their olives and apricot groves and honeybees and the whole thing. And the village, we visited the village of Taibeh, one of the few entirely Christian villages in Palestine in the West Bank. And yeah, we went to a beautiful Christmas concert there, and just watching the normal within the abnormal was fascinating, to see people gathering together to celebrate the birth of our Lord. And when we walked the streets of Jerusalem and saw, I mean, the lighting of the Christmas tree in Bethlehem was wild. It was so jam packed with all these wonderful Christian Palestinians. It was so jam packed that I could have picked my feet up and just been carried by the crowd. It was amazing. So many people out in the streets and celebrating the birth of the Savior. And so, and yet, they have their own community and their own ways of being there, and it's beautiful. And I was so touched by Muslims and Christians yearning together, Palestinians yearning together for peace with justice for everyone. Beth?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. Yeah, the focus of this particular delegation, because we were Catholic workers, we were staying in guest houses that were run by Catholic nuns, mostly French-speaking nuns. We went to a lot of churches. We heard Rifat Cassis, is that his name, Mark? One of the primary authors of the Kairos document, and now there's a Kairos 2 document. And for those of you who are concerned about the plights of Palestinian Christians, I really encourage you to access those documents. There's been a curriculum developed around Kairos 2, meant to be used during Lent to learn more about, and it's basically kind of giving marching orders. It's dire. It's really dire, the situation for Palestinian Christians. It's dire for all Palestinians. And the birthplace, and the convergence of so many different faiths. And then particularly hearing from Christians. We had this experience of walking down the street in Taipei and being summoned into a little house by this man who didn't speak or anything to us, just led us to this house. And it happened to be of a group of nuns who would typically be in Jerusalem offering hospitality. But they're so exhausted that now they're in Taipei pretty much cloistered. They write icons, and we were welcomed in and just able to have a little bit of a short conversation with them. But yeah, and then and the last thing I'll mention is that we did informally meet with someone from the Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem who would not go on record at all. We couldn't take her photograph, and we couldn't, and I won't say her name or quote her, but also talked about the situation for the churches, particularly in Jerusalem. It's really, it's a rough go. So obviously keep everyone in your prayers, and try to access that Kairos 2 document if you can find it.
I wonder, Borhan, if you would briefly share your perspective as a Palestinian Muslim dealing with Palestinian Christians as your neighbors. And I was struck by that story you told about your early years and the role of your neighbor in your own life. Maybe share a little bit of that. It's a great window into the beauties of Palestine.
Yeah, in Palestine, where I was born and grew up in the West Bank, we really rarely realize who is Muslim and who's Christian. And my grandparents, my mother's family, were next door neighbors to a Jewish or to a Christian family, and I spent so much time in their house. It was amazing. But my mother and relatives always told me the story that when I was born, my mother had breast issues and got sick, so she could not breastfeed me. At that time, apparently, and that shows how old I am, there was no formula. Uh, and so Emil was my age. Our Christian next door neighbors had a baby at the same time as my mother had me. And I spent months and months at her house. She was feeding both of us. And both of them, my mother and my feeding mother, are dead now. But she used to tell me that she had one of us on each breast, and we were feeding together. See, that is how close we were as Palestinians and Christians. We always celebrated. It's like if you went to Bethlehem at the time when there's freedom movement, a lot of Palestinians from all over the West Bank traveled to go to Bethlehem to the lighting of the Christmas tree. Now it's probably more difficult, but there is more people celebrating, Muslims, Christians, and you will never figure it out. They celebrated with us, and we celebrated with them. It was fun when I was young. It was fun because it's more holidays, more celebrations for people, kids and people. So it was really this whole thing changed. I wanted to add one thing. You went to Taiba. Taiba a few months ago got the church burned, and a number of homes and farms were burned. I'm sure if you went to Taiba, you saw all of that. I wonder if you went before the burning or after the burning. Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up, Barhan, we were there just after.
After, okay.
Just after it happened. Although it's my understanding that there has been more violence towards Taipei since we've left.
Oh yeah, the main church was burned badly, and I think there was massive movement to repair it and bring it back.
Yeah, it was the old church there.
Yep.
There. Yep.
And that is the settlers. We pay their salaries. Most of them are unemployed. They're sitting there carrying guns, and those are our employees. We pay through our tax dollars.
All right, friends, this has been rich and important. We're past time. I don't see any other hands up.
Mark, I just want to note that people
Yes.
can go to the chat to catch the Kairos document and the link for the Bad Faith documentary, if they'd like.
And I think also your organization is mentioned there too, right? Did you put
Yes,
that?
yes, thanks.
Yes, great. All right. I'm delighted that we could all be together on this rainy afternoon here in North Carolina. And those of you that joined us from far afield, we're glad that you did. And I will say that I have been in conversation with Ilan Pappé, the famous Israeli historian, and he's going to do a webinar with us soon. We're working on getting a date together, so I'll be sure to let everyone know about that. Should be a great opportunity to hear from one of the preeminent Israeli historians. All right. How about if we unmute and do our applause to thank um, Mary and Beth for their great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you, Mary and
all.
Beth.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
You're
you.
all awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank you. Thank
you.
you.
Thanks so much.
Blessing.
Thank
Love
you.
you. Love you.
Big love.
And this was
Thank you.
recorded. Hopefully it'll go out to everyone. Thanks, buddy.
Yes,
That's
it'll
wonderful.
Kate always puts it up on our website. That's vjp.org. vjp.org is the website. It's up there. Please share it.
Will it be
we
sent
want-
to the attendees?
It can be. I'm not sure how she does that. Kate is probably still on. I know you can always find it. It will go out in our newsletter this week. That she's just put that in there.
Can
So
you
if
put the chat information in that newsletter as well? The links to the film and the document?
Yes, Kate's made a note that she can do that. So, and if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, you can do that by going to our website. But many of you get the newsletter, and that's a great way to get this particular webinar recording. So,
Thanks so much.
all right.
Love you.
Thanks,
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
God
you.
bless you. Keep
Thank
on
you,
keeping
dear
on.
That's
sisters.
right.
Thank you so
Shukran
much.
jazilan.
Hi, Ellen. Yeah, never give up, y'all. Never give up. It's all
Never.
Keep
good.
the faith. Keep the
Thank you,
faith.
Mary Grace.
Thank you, Mark, for organizing this. Beth, love ya. Thanks.
It's great being with you guys. Thank you.
Peace.
Thank
Bye,
you, Mary
friends.
Grace. Thank
Bye,
you, Mark.
y'all. Good.